Yeah, what we have Phil Drysdale today. So you're going to talk about marriage, divorce, marriage.
Yep, marriage, divorce, marriage. That's the way that I've chose to go. But chose is probably a bit of a loose term, maybe. But
so you grow up in a family. Your dad's a pastor. Yep. Your mom. You got lots of brothers and sisters. Kind of talk about what your mind was growing up, what your parents kind of influenced you on marriage, and you created this mind about marriage, and go from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up Christian home, obviously. My parents married fairly young. Both of them came out of being non-Christians and became Christians, so they're first generation. My dad had a very wild and exploratory life before Christianity. He was in the Navy. He was a DJ before that, and so he had a girl in every port, and then he got saved while in the Navy. And so he went from all to nothing. And so they got married. But I mean, growing up, I don't ever remember seeing my parents kiss.
Wow.
My entire childhood. So they were not overtly, we talked in another podcast about expressing sexuality and giving children freedom to see it's normal, it's okay. That was not my upbringing at all.
Never.
But I knew, you get married. That's the thing you do. You grow up, you meet a girl, you get married. You don't meet a girl and nothing else happens unless you get married. That was the paradigm, and that was fairly clearly taught in the churches we were a part of. I don't remember my parents overly hammering that home, if I'm honest. They were pretty chill. My mom was always more liberal than my dad. My mom was always a bit more like, you do you. She was always fun to. She always would provoke my dad a little bit. I think she had fun at provoking my dad and winding my dad up.
But for your dad, who was very liberal before he got saved,
it's pretty wild.
That's interesting.
He's very conservative, so he flipped quite hard, I guess.
Wow.
But I don't know if he was probably conservative anyway in his wild days. I mean, yeah, sure, he had a girl in every port. He was probably quite active sexually and stuff like that, but he probably still had very traditional conservative views in other areas.
Right.
And so, it's such a broad concept. I don't really like using the terms liberal and conservative because they're just so loaded, and we black and white everything into that one camp. So liberal means you think this, and this, and it's
right.
I just meant in this one area. I probably have a position that's slightly more progressive than my peers or something. That's all it might mean. But yeah, so it's interesting, that very interesting. But my mom probably grew up. I think my dad was the first person she was with. We never really talked about that sort of stuff. It's just not something we talk about. I'm pretty sure it was, but she had quite a pretty wild upbringing and stuff as well, and was she would have been on your checklist that you have for good, bad Christians. She would have been a bad Christian if she was one, and maybe wouldn't have got in at all if people knew half the stuff she got up to. And so my upbringing was you get married. We weren't really shown what marriage is other than you raise kids together, you get on peaceably, you kind of have reasonable conversations with each other, occasionally have a fight, but my parents were really healthy individuals in many ways, and I'm sure they were very healthy sexually as well, but it was all hidden for me.
Well, you should say that, because how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Yeah, well, I have four siblings by blood, so yeah.
So did you date much? High school, college?
Dude, I was really ill in my teenage years. It caused me to have very delayed onset of my puberty and things like that. So that caused me to be very insecure, I'm introverted by nature anyway, but I was very insecure, felt very uncomfortable around girls, especially pretty girls. So really didn't start exploring anything like that at all until I was kind of probably I wanted to. I definitely wanted to, and I definitely was driven by that in a lot of my decisions and things like that, but I would never really feel comfortable asking a girl out or anything like that. So I was very I was the perfect example of the Christian guy that likes a girl and doesn't do anything until she's married to someone else almost, and then it's oh man, I probably should have done something, and so that was me through and through. I think my first girlfriend I was probably about 20, and so I had definitely close relationships to some girls before that, in one way, shape, or another, but there was never any kind of sexual component to it. And so my first girlfriend, where there was definitely there was a relationship there. We were boyfriend girlfriend. There was definitely sexual elements to it. Again, we talked about, when I say sexual, I'm not talking we have sex. I'm just, I'm talking like we're turned on by each other. We kiss, we hold hands, we're driven to be attracted to one another in some way, shape, or form. That went on for a little while, and then probably a couple other girls in some way, shape, or form, probably a few in one shape or form. But eventually, I met my wife while I was in ministry school in California, and she was back in the UK. And I would come back in the summer to renew my visa and stuff, so I could come back out to America. And I came back and met her, and so we started hanging out nonstop. Fell in love, and then I went back to ministry school. And so we did long distance a lot, Skyping every other day, maybe every day if we could. We'd talk for hours on end. Like, I basically wasn't functioning outside of that. So we did that, got engaged over this, maybe we got engaged over Christmas, and then got married in that summer. So it was boom, 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 and that was great. It was really great. Loved that. Loved being married, but lots of different dynamics involved in there, and it was a whole new world for me. It really was a whole new world. No one had ever really taught me anything about sex. I had a lot of experience in what sex was. I was very well versed in what sex was, but solely from porn, and I had watched a lot of it by that point. I'm like 25 or something, so I've had a sex drive for about 10 plus years, and no way to explore it or even talk about it or engage with it in the church, in my peer group, and so that drives you to all sorts of other stuff. And so I had that kind of understanding of sex really coming into things.
Now, when you were at ministry school, did they have conversations about marriage and stuff like that? Because I know for me, like, I didn't have conversations about marriage with my parents, but when I got to ministry school, I was like, I went to everything about marriage. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I felt like I knew everything about marriage, because I was like, I've learned from the best, I mean, I'm learning how to counsel marriage things, and I'm not even married, I mean, those are the kind of classes you could take, and I'm sitting there saying, I know it,
Yep. Yeah, no, there was definitely dynamics to that. So, I mean, we got taught in different ways. I would argue now, looking back, I would see a lot of the teaching as deeply toxic, really unhealthy teaching. Very purity driven, very, marriage is X and this is Y, and these are the things that fall into each category, and this is what it should look like. And it was, at the time, clicked, made sense, worked within my paradigm, my worldview, how I saw Christianity, how I saw marriage. Everything worked well for as far as I could see on the surface, right? There's still people getting divorced and having marriages fall apart, but you don't see all that necessarily, and the people teaching it are certainly not showing you if it's happening. So it all seemed just right, and I did have a lot of teaching. I certainly had a lot of teaching in a lot of my background is in communication and connecting with people, and so I brought a lot of that to my relationship, and that was really great stuff I brought to my relationship in many ways. And so, there was definitely big pros that came from being part of some sort of ministry school, seminary, kind of Bible college, that kind of thing. I think can really help. But I think there's also a lot of stuff that, if it's bad in the church, it just gets worse when you're like taught you go back another layer, you peel back some of the layers, and you realize the depths of what we're teaching. And it's not like it gets better and we're miscommunicating. It's actually, no, this is just really in its roots not a healthy thing. That was my reflections on it at the time. I wouldn't have said that necessarily.
So you get home, you get married. Mm-hmm. Now, did you go back to the U.S. together, or did you kind of just stay home at that point? So we spent a year in the
U.S. We spent, and then we went to the U.K., spent a year in Scotland, and then we moved to Ireland and spent a year there. And during the year in Ireland, that's when, that's when things obviously were deteriorating, and that's when the divorce, the marriage ended, basically. And so we were only married about 3 years, and I would say we were only kind of functionally married for about 2. So that last year really was, we were very disconnected. And I wanted to work on things. I wanted to do marriage counseling, things like that. But my wife at that point was like, I'm done trying. And so I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, sitting down with her and just having a conversation and saying, look, what is it? Here's my list of reasons we can make it work. Here's my list of reasons I love you, like blah, blah, blah. And she basically said, look, I know we could make this work. I don't want it anymore. And I think that was the moment where I kind of realized, oh, this isn't just about me. I think I very much made it about me, maybe fixing her and changing me. But really, this is a decision that she'd made that was all about me in many ways. We both brought a lot to the table that was not healthy and not working. But it wasn't something I could do. You can't fix a marriage if only one person is wanting to fix it.
Right.
So I went to therapy on my own and worked on a lot of stuff. And it took about 8 months before really we separated. But we were barely, we were living in a small studio apartment, and we didn't talk, maybe a little bit here and there, there was just no connection. And so it was really tough, really, really brutal 8 months of my life. Probably the worst 8 months of my life if I look through my life. And I've had a lot of bad months, but that was pretty grim.
Now, how did you go through? I mean, emotionally. I mean, did you feel like responsible? Did you kind of feel like the church and information doctrine that you kind of been yielding to and desiring fell short? I mean, where did you feel spiritually at and as an individual?
So I was going through a lot of constant unraveling. I constantly change and grow and explore. I think that's part of what I do. My day in, day out is I'm constantly looking at new information, new ideas, exploring doctrines, and constantly changing what I believe in one way or another. And so I think that was an element that sometimes gave me something to stand on, and other times took away things I would have stood on before that weren't there anymore. I think it was a really hard time. I felt very rejected, very powerless, very hopeless. I didn't have any friends there. She was from Ireland, so she was Irish. I had no one there. I didn't know anyone. And when I moved to Ireland, the local churches had got together and said, this guy's not welcome, we're not having him. So I'm a controversial person. I understand why they made those decisions and how. But
so she was a church girl too.
Yeah, but I couldn't go to any of their churches. So I couldn't. It was very hard for me to make friends, and I'm quite introverted anyway. And sometimes if you gave me that option, I'd probably function quite well. I wouldn't know how badly I was functioning probably, but I'd get on quite well for a while. So I was very lonely, really struggled. I had some friends across, in the UK or the US that I would talk to and that were really helpful and kind of pivotal in those times. But yeah, it was a really, really tough time. I think going to therapy really helped me take ownership of what I had to deal with and stuff. So the marriage therapist met with us once, and then I went along on my own to some therapy. But marriage therapist said, oh yeah, this is salvageable. You need to work on this and you need to work on this. And my wife was not interested in. She might want to work on herself and develop, but she didn't want to work on the relationship. So she went off, was doing that. But I at least had a list of things of these are some flaws in my life, these are some things I can work on. And I'm deeply pragmatic, so for me, I sat down, this was in kind of January, February, and the whole thing kind of fell apart August or so. I sat there and was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know. My wife had said, look, I'm not sure where I'm at. The discussion where she was like, I'm done, I'm not interested in working on it, that was in August. So at this early stage, she's just like, this isn't working, I think I want a divorce. But basically it sat there and she's like, well, I don't know, I'm not in a mental space to make a good decision right now. Let's give us some time. We'll figure out, when I'm done with my degree. So she was finishing up a master's at that point. And so that was like, okay, well, by August, September, we'll figure out what we're doing. So I'm working hard. I'm going, well, I can only work on me. I can't help her. I can't change her. I can't make her do anything. But I can guarantee that coming out the other end of this, I'm either going to be changed in a positive way that means that I'm going to be a better husband if she wants to work on this, and I'm going to be more equipped to work on this, or she walks away and bails and I'm going to be a better person to deal with that and to process it and to navigate it and hopefully go off and find someone else at some point and be remarried or whatever it looks like. But I did struggle. I struggled a lot. It was a really, really hard kind of 8-month season of my life. Really brutal.
Wow. So once you got the divorce, came back home?
I travel for a living. That's what I do. I travel around and I speak to different groups and do different things. And there was one group in Manchester in England, which isn't somewhere I'm I was familiar with at the point, but I traveled there a lot and spoke there and had really good connections there. I even went there a couple of times a year, especially when I was going through that season. I went over a couple of times just to kind of connect and hang out with some of those people. I wasn't even speaking, but just like, I just want to be around some good people that are healthy and encourage me and give life to me. And so for me, I had a decision. I could go home where my family were, or I could maybe go to this place where there was this community that were healthy. And I just thought, if I go home, I'm just going to stagnate. It's not going to be healthy for me. It's not going to be the right thing, although it's really safe. And so I moved to Manchester, which is where I went, and just became a part of that community, that church, the community there. That was really helpful for me. Really helped me kind of work through whatever I needed to work through and kind of come out the other end and go, okay, yeah, I'm okay. It's okay. That was really, really good. So, yeah.
It's interesting because, I know some of your backstory and stuff like that. And so it's like I'm listening to you, and you use the term deconstructed in church, and it kind of sounds like you deconstructed in marriage, but each time kind of self-examining yourself, self-examining your beliefs, and saying, where do I want to be? How do I want to be? I mean, that's what I just love about you is that you can analyze Phil. Mm-hmm. You can put Phil on the altar here and say, is what Phil's doing right? Do I need that help? And then you go receive that help and information, and then you apply it to your life and you apply it to your marriage. And same with, the grace message and the, what your doctrinal beliefs have changed and shifted. But you've gone through two major deconstructions, one in marriage and one in church. Mm-hmm. Was that timing about the same in kind of this process?
I think it's tough for me because I work with people that are deconstructing. That's my job, is literally day in, day out. I help dozens of people, probably hundreds and hundreds of people a month that are going through this process of deconstructing. And looking at it, it's really interesting because the flip, the switch that flips where they kind of go, oh wow, I'm deconstructing, that feels very overnight in a sense. Mm-hmm. But actually when they have to work it out, that takes a long period of time. For me, I grew up kind of with that mindset of like constantly wanting to change and grow, and that was my mom's amazing input in my life, was like, don't take anything at face value. Constantly evaluate, constantly look at everything you believe, question it constantly. If new information presents itself, check, does this change what I believe? Does this change who I am? Does this change what I think is true? And so I was always doing that. Growing up, I've always done that, working through it. So even when I was at ministry school, they gave you prescribed books to read. I would read really contrary books, very contrary books, like hardcore fundamentalists. I'd read really wild progressives. I'd read really charismatic stuff. I would try and read different perspectives. So one of the things I would do, my rule that I've had for probably about 10 years now, is for every book I know I'm going to agree with, I have to read 2 books I think I'm going to disagree with.
Wow.
And I will not try and break that if I can avoid it. And so I've always done that because that's how you grow. You don't grow reading books you agree with. It's nice to do, but you don't grow.
Well, that's the problem I see with doctrine, right? Because you can basically only fill these 4 walls with doctrine, because doctrine has a demand of what you should believe about everything, and so you cannot go outside of that doctrine to think anything differently or act anything differently, or so that's interesting that you even challenge yourself, not saying this is one doctrine I'm gonna live under, but I'm gonna gather all of the information together.
But all that to say, though, what is interesting is, on the whole, the people that I do work with, that isn't necessarily the way that they functioned growing up, and it isn't how they thought growing up. And so deconstruction is quite a severe kind of like boom, it kind of happens. And 9 times out of 10, deconstruction correlates to suffering. Usually, for most people in their life, when they start really unraveling something they believe in, it's usually because they've been exposed to some great pain. So Richard Rohr often says it's through great suffering and great love that we change. And so, yes, great love often changes us. Getting married to someone and pursuing loving them better might cause us to question some things we believe and change that, or whatever. Having a kid born, that'll mess with your beliefs and change it, right? It's this beautiful, loving thing. But also having your mother die, having your sister get cancer, having your child born and it has a disability. Those kind of things, living with an illness yourself or something. being in a wreck, whatever it is. These are the sort of examples that you hear day in, day out of people that are deconstructing. I was in a huge car wreck, and it just caused me to think, I actually don't really know if I believe what I believe. Well, and, I started to open it up. And so I think whether I'm on a journey constantly of trying to remove some unhealthy beliefs and introduce new ones, this deconstruction, reconstruction, in the moments of suffering I've had in my life, my divorce being a great example, I have probably reevaluated stuff more. I've been pushed to question certain things that I might not have questioned otherwise, or it might have been 10 years before I questioned that one topic, and all of a sudden you're like, no, I want to look into this. I really want to figure out what I believe about, divorce would be probably a good one, right? So I'm going through a divorce. Well, what do I believe about that, right? Is that fair? Is it true? Because when I'm not going through a divorce, I don't really mind what my position on divorce is. It's not really that material to me. And if I have a pretty harsh view on divorce, well, it doesn't affect me. It's maybe harsh for someone else, but not for me. It's very selfish, but we're all selfish beings. We're all driven by our very selfish drive, if we're honest with ourselves.
Right. I think most advice is selfish advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and most of our theology is deeply selfish theology, right? It's the reason that if you go find the average Christian and you said, here's a big picket, you can write on it what you want, and you can go picket anything you want. There's a reason they picket homosexuals, because most of us are heterosexual, right? They don't go picket McDonald's and say gluttony is a sin. Right? Why? Because we all like a double cheeseburger or a Big Mac, right? So so we pick and choose our sins.
The two big sins are abortion and
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because many people in the church are gay, and many people in the church have abortions. It's very common. We just don't talk about it and we hide it. But yeah, you're right, exactly. But generally speaking, it's the hidden sins. It's the sins that we don't struggle with. The one I don't struggle with is the one I'm quite happy to be very vocal about it not being wrong. But as soon as I struggle with it, so you look at a lot of people change their view on homosexuality when their kid comes out as gay, or their sister goes, I'm going to get married to a woman, or whatever, and it's like, oh, I'm going to have to think about this, And people say, oh, you're just being watered down by the world. But the truth is what's actually happening, and that might be a part of it for sure in certain things. But the truth is for the most part, you're just being challenged in an area that you never had to think about before. And you could just accept the party line. But now the party line is going to hurt someone that you love. The party line means I can't talk to my son anymore. Maybe I will just check this, right? It's worth it having a look.
Well, being vulnerable, my wife's sister is gay, got married, and we didn't go to the wedding.
Okay.
And, maybe looking at it from a risk analysis, well, she doesn't live in our town. Maybe it's acceptable for us to make a stand. Are we affirming, like if you go, then you're affirming, saying it's viewed in God's eyes as right, or all these things. But like you said, now if it was my son,
yeah.
Would I go? Would I still cause that rejection? And that's a true point. When do you kind of break down your doctrine? Within these four walls, is it severe enough that your sister-in-law is gay, or is it only when your own kid is? You know.
And we all have a line, and so it's not to say that you're wrong or you're doing something inherently evil by not questioning some of these things. It's just natural that we're not going to question things that aren't particularly affecting us. We only have so much time in a day, and we only have so much to drive us. I think it's important if we start to realize, oh wow, this is having a significant effect on people, especially the people we love, right? It's easier if it's people we love. If it's people we don't like, that's not a problem. I'm quite happy to have a position that hurts them or harms them. But as soon as it's someone I love, I'm like, I better think about this, right? So you look at divorce, right? It's like, I don't know. I mean, how many people I talked to that were going through divorces and helped them? Like we talked about Christian leaders, right? So you learn about marriage and you're an expert in marriage, right? You're not even married, right? And it's like, how many people I talked to that had gone through divorce? And looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea the pain they were in.
Right.
No idea. I couldn't conceptualize just what that would even be like. I had
the
no
loneliness
concept.
and
I just couldn't fathom. And so looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, what an idiot. Like I can't even believe my positions or even some of the things I might have said or taught. Just wild how insensitive it was. I'm not thinking about when I'm sharing a message that in a room of 500 people, 50 of them have had a divorce. Whatever. I don't know the stats, but a lot of people have had divorces. And so I'm like, wow, I haven't thought about those people going through that pain and that suffering, and how they might hear something that I say through a specific lens, because they're thinking in a world of divorce, and they take that as painful and shameful and condemning. And so it just changes the way you think. So you do go, oh, I better research this. I better look at this. I want to see what it is. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, like, if we look at Jesus, you know, we see him at the well.
Yep.
And he's talking to the woman through the issues, you know, and like a lot of people portray her as a whore because she had 5 husbands, yep. But it probably was that she was barren, you know. And so basically the guy says, well, I'm going to get that done. You know, she's fine. I'm going to have, you know, oh, that guy was shooting blanks. I'm going to go, you know, make her my woman. And so, and you know, she was beautiful because 5 men decided to marry her. But anyways, he met her where he was at, where she was at. You know, he considered her emotions of being barren. You know, he did not say, oh, I can't believe you have, you know, even the man you live with now is not you whore. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the end of the sentence. You know, basically he considered her barrenness and her hurts and basically her desire. Man, I wish I could bear a son, a daughter. I wish I could produce life. Because you got to even think about it, like what Jesus says, you'll thirst no more. You'll have life. Mm-hmm. You know, the woman who can't produce life, he's saying, I'm going to give you life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just considering what people are going through.
Exactly. And considering the context we read that, how do we read it? How would we look at someone that's been through that many marriages? Well, what is a marriage in our culture, right? It's much more about choice. So that then you are in divorce very much choosing to come out of that in some way, shape or form. Most people that get divorced are making a conscious choice to do so. And in that culture, you get divorced. Generally speaking, a woman could never file for divorce. That wasn't an option. It was men that filed for divorce. If you're a female, even if your husband's unfaithful, that's not what it's about, because men were unfaithful in that culture. That's why you had love children. You know, you marry someone, and that's who you're partnered with, and that's the context of you having some sort of power, some sort of structure. You know, uniting families, creating more wealth for the combination or whatever. And this woman would run your household for you, and she would bear your children and make sure that they're in the right lineage. But I mean, you may or may not love them. There's just some woman that you're betrothed to. I'm going to go sleep with the people I actually love, right? And that was very common, even in Judaism. But it was the culture across the board. It's where we get the word love child from. What's a love child? It's a child born out of wedlock. Why is it called a love child? Because the people you're not married to are the people you love.
But
right?
You love them, right?
And that's historically the way it worked. And so, you know, we're looking at something like that, and we don't read it. Again, I know we've talked about this in other podcasts, that we don't read it through that lens of that culture. We read it through our lens of our culture. And so it's just really interesting how we bring a lot to the table. Really interesting dynamics. So even Jesus talking about divorce, people love to quote it because Jesus did talk about divorce. So we really can shame people that go through divorce. But we don't realize that there's multiple expressions of divorce. There's 2 main expressions of divorce in the Hebrew culture, this Aramaic culture. And there's 2 different phrases that would have been used, a word and a phrase. And there's a word for divorce that is a pretty accurate and reasonable translation of divorce, right? So when we read divorce, sometimes it's very honestly and fairly translated. But there's another word kind of phrase that's translated as divorce, and it's not at all fair. This word is, if you were to translate it more literally, it would be like put away. And so there's a practice in Judaism where people were wanting to create a new lineage with a different family. Maybe they married one family and they had some sort of power and structure and whatever, but that family lost their wealth, or maybe this woman wasn't bearing children, or maybe this woman wasn't very attractive anymore, or didn't have any status, or whatever it was. They would put this woman away. So they would divorce her for no reason other than I want to marry someone else to have a different connection. And so when Jesus is condemning the practice of putting away, to translate it as divorce is really unfair, because there's a big difference between you slept with someone else, you don't want to work in this relationship, you don't want to be a part of this healthy dynamic that is a husband and wife, to, hey, I'm kind of done with you and I can see better opportunities over there. That's 2 completely different expressions of dissolving a relationship. And
but
Jesus is saying
reading it like
one
the
is
same.
not okay,
Right. That's
and the
a good
other
point.
is potentially very okay.
That's a really good point.
And so I think again, we need to look at culture. We need to look at the context, because how many times have you heard pastors talk about Jesus saying divorce is not okay, and saying it's not okay, it's not okay, it's not okay. Wasn't okay in the Old Testament, it's not okay in the New Testament. Even Jesus said it's in the red letters, you don't get a divorce. So I just spat on the mic. Sorry. But it's there. It's Bible's clear, and yet if you just quickly check in the context of the culture, what did divorce look like? There's something called putting away. What language did Jesus use? Okay, that changes everything. And so we really need to be conscious of that, especially when we talk about things like relation. You're talking about marriage and divorce and sex and these topics that we're talking about on this podcast together. Like, as soon as you divorce the context of culture and history, you're going to have a disaster reading through the Bible. It's a nightmare, because it isn't anything like what it is today. Sex isn't what it was. Marriage wasn't what it was. Divorce isn't what it was. The reason people got married is totally different. Therefore, the reason people get divorced is totally different. It's not really about power dynamics as much these days. It's about being in love, right? This is why the church fought for church to be for marriage within Christians to remain a preordained thing by the parents. An arranged marriage was very strongly fought for by the church, because they said we've always done it this way, and it works this way, and if you fall in love with them, that's good, but otherwise go love someone else.
I wonder what the odds were. I mean, just speaking, like now they basically say it's like 50-50. You get married, you're going to get divorced. I wonder what the odds were back in Jesus' day. I mean, obviously, clearly we could see there was a lot of women putting away for, any reason that the man wanted to do. I mean, that was kind of the other thing, women couldn't divorce men, but men could divorce for any reason, which is, we already talked about how selfish we are. So yeah, I wonder kind of what were the odds. Was that system a better system, or? There's
a good person to look into. So a person called Stephanie Kuntz, who's she's a world leading expert on historical marriage. So she really knows her stuff. I think she's in her 80s. She's still traveling and speaking. She lectures. She's got a great book called Marriage: A History. And I think the subtitle was called Why Love Conquered Marriage. And it's a brilliant book. It starts right from early nomadic tribes and how relationships work and how marriage was conceptualized there, right through to modern day and how it's shifted and changed. And what's fascinating about it, so many things are fascinating about it, but touch on a couple of things. Divorce was really common throughout all of history. It's always been very common. But it was much more the putting away than that we've fallen out of love, because marriage wasn't about love. So it's always been common, but it's usually been a little bit more cutthroat in the sense of it's about that. It's not been as common because usually the family ties were still important. That heritage was still important. That lineage was important. The power dynamics, the money, the wealth. That's why we're married in the first place. So unless those things were changing, didn't really matter. It was much more common among the poor, where those things ebbed and flowed a lot. Right? So you marry someone, and then that other person that you were potentially suited to becomes quite wealthy. You're quickly maybe I could go marry that person instead. But marriage was very common, and the church was quite quick to take off divorce certificates left, right, and center in the Middle Ages. Another misnomer, though, the whole 50-50, right? So half of marriages end in divorce, but you are not likely to be divorced at a 50% rate. It's very unlikely. You're actually likely to be married at a divorced at a much lower percentage, because while half the marriages end in divorce, it's not half the people get divorced. So look at the woman at the well. She's ruining everyone's statistics, right? She's got 4 divorces out of 5, right? So that's at 80%, right? So she just shifted those stats big time. If you had one person that's been married to the same person his whole life, or in fact, if you had 3 people that have been married to one person their whole life, and then you had her, and you said, all right, out of these 4 people, how many marriages end in divorce? More marriages end in divorce than not. But actually, only one of those 4 people has been divorced. Right?
That's a good point.
It's a big factor in today's stats is actually when you look at who's getting divorced, you're not, half of marriages end in divorce, yes, but you're not likely to end in divorce at all. Marriages make it, and they do make it a lot of the time. It's that certain people are predispositioned to marry and divorce. and they've got some work to do in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they need to figure out that marriage isn't for them, or I don't know.
Well, basically you said you worked on you. So you moved to Manchester. You knew not to move home. You moved to Manchester so that you could grow as a man, as an individual. In that time, were you growing for the potential of meeting a woman, get married? Did you feel like marriage was for you? Did you kind of ixnay marriage and say, I'm going to be single the rest of my life? I mean, kind of what was your transitional points?
Probably all of those, like every 12 minutes are probably cycled or something.
Right.
But on the whole, I knew that it's not good for me to be alone. I'm an introvert and I love being alone, and I will lock myself in a room for a week and probably not notice too much. But at a certain point, I'm going to like burn out and go, I need to be around people. And I've got a great community of many friends. I love hanging out with people. I do it a lot, get lots of people in a room together. I get to do one-on-one. I love meeting with people and being with people. And I knew that in the long term, I would probably like to get married or be with someone again romantically. For me, that wasn't my driving force. To me, I think it's a really unhealthy thing that we teach people that they're on this earth to get married. I think it's just really, really unhealthy. And I think the church does not do well at this at all. We are not invested in making healthy humans. So we talked in our podcast about women and how we treat women. In the church, if you're a woman, you are taught your job on this earth is to get married and have kids. To the degree that if girls... it's guys and girls as well, but if you're a single 25-year-old in the church, you're going to be asked every single time you walk into church,
why aren't you married?
Why aren't you married? Who are you using? So much judgment and condemnation and shame attached to those questions, and so much assumption. And yet we forget in our Bible, Paul clearly states, hey, it's better not to be married, right? Literally better not to be married, and yet the default is you must be married. Right.
Well, we go back to selfish conversations. So get married so you can have kids so I can be a grandparent.
Yeah.
Not about how it helps you mentally or how it helps you socially or anything like that.
Nope.
I don't care what abuses you go through, anything. Just produce me some grandkids.
Yep. I had a conversation on Instagram the other day. We were talking about same-sex relations and marriages. I was hosting a conversation about that, and someone sent me a message and said, well, my daughter's gay and that means I won't get grandchildren. And I was like, okay, what's your point? And he's like, well, I deserve to have grandchildren, she should marry a man. And I was like, okay, take to the side, just put to the side any views you have of same sex, just put that to the side. Can you conceive that this person, this human being, is not on earth to fulfill your wants and desires? If you want another kid in your life, go adopt someone, right? I mean, like, seriously. Or go find a couple that have a kid and offer to babysit their kid once in a while. Like, this is not your... But again, we're going back to women are property. They are. And we're still carrying it into this culture today. And that was an American, Western mindseted man saying, this daughter of mine, in some sense or another, he's saying, this is my property. She owes me a grandchild.
Wow.
And that's what we're saying, and it's really, really scary to the degree that we do this. We do it in a lot of different ways. So I can't remember what we were talking about before that, but
well, we were just kind of talking about selfishness and how people thrust on you that it's your responsibility as my daughter to produce kids so that I can have joy, versus what's the best for my daughter, what's the best for my son, because you were talking about basically Paul saying it's better not to marry.
Yeah. Well, and in this day and age, there's never been a time where there's less onus, right? So you have Adam and Eve, regardless of how you take it, whether you take it literal or figurative or whatever. The story is you've got two people there at the beginning, and God's saying, hey, maybe fill this place out. There's quite a lot of space, right? Go make some babies. Right. So we fill the place out, right? And there's a lot of potential intellectual hula hoops and gymnastics we have to do to not have mass incest. But, outside of that, let's say it's literal. The point is, look, you've got a whole planet Earth here, and you've got two people. You could probably have a few more people and it wouldn't get too crowded, right? But the point being, that commandment may not be necessarily as important or as much of a drive right now when we're struggling with overpopulation and we're really causing some major strain on the planet because we've got too many people. And so suddenly you think, hey, you know what? If my daughter doesn't want to get married and wants to go and become a astrophysicist, or wants to become a football player or a fashion designer, like, and wants to do that in her own world, with her own desires, with her own strengths, with her own passions, that's awesome. We don't need more people, really. We actually really don't need more people right now. So it's okay. It's okay. And if she wants to have kids, that's really okay as well. There's lots of data on societies that take that off the kids. Most people still want to get married and have kids. So this is what I always say. I'm always fascinated. I'm like, the thing with gender roles and things like that, if you take gender roles off of people, if there's actually clear-cut gender roles, if males are actually better at this and women are better at that, and males want to do this and women want to do that, it'll happen. But when you place the gender roles on them, they don't have a choice. And so for me, I'm like, well, clearly the freedom should be there for them to choose what they want to do. And if you so clearly believe that they're going to go and get married and have kids, well, they'll probably go and have married and kids. Or you might be wrong. And I think that creating the freedom for people to be wrong, for people to go and do what they want to do. So the whole point being, I think we're really crushing people in the church by that whole thing. So 25-year-old walks in church and single, why are you not married? They finally get married under pressure, probably not even happy now, right? Because they've rushed it and found the only one guy in the church that was single, and he's an absolute disaster. There was a reason he was the only guy that was single in the church.
Yeah, because you don't feel legitimate because everybody's asking you, why aren't you married?
You're a terrible Christian. You don't belong. You're not fulfilling your purpose on earth. But then you're married, and like it's like 4 seconds in, it's like, wow, you're 26, so why don't you have kids? It's like, geez, we've been married 4 minutes. Like, you know, like, are you kidding? And so, like, but we're constantly putting this pressure on people. And so for me, when I was going through my divorce, I wasn't getting ready to go into another relationship. I think there's something deeply unhealthy and toxic about that. This idea that my identity is rooted in so I can be a husband, so I can be a wife. You know, that's not healthy. I want to be healthy for my own sake. I want to be a healthy human being so I can be a healthy human being. Someone else can enjoy that at some point potentially, but everyone's going to enjoy it if I'm just doing it for myself, whether I'm getting married or not. People are so fixated on becoming the right husband or the right wife before they're married, but they're terrible like friends, they're terrible whatever else, you know, like how about we just become healthy human beings? Right. And so I wasn't driven by marriage. It took me quite a long time actually kind of to talk myself into, okay, probably should start looking for a new relationship. Because I was really happy. I've got lots of friends. I've got lots of friends that are male and female. They tick most of my boxes. I'm not particularly. I don't have a high sex drive. I'm fairly low on my sex drive. This is a common myth we teach in the church as well, that men are just crazed, horny guys all the time. They want to have sex with anything that moves. You know, that's actually not true. Actually, only 60% of men have a higher sex drive than their wives. 40% have a lower sex drive than their wives. And because we teach that causes a lot of problems in relationships. Huge problems in relationships. Because then you've got guys that feel like terrible if they have a low sex drive. You've got women that think they're just like, I must be undesirable. My husband must hate me, because I've been taught, by the way, when you get married, you're just going to have sex with your husband at all times because he's just going to walk around with an erection, you know, like, and you're just going to have to lay there and enjoy it because it's not even pleasurable for you, right? And it's causing these women suddenly, when their husband's going, no, I'm actually good, they're going, well, I was told you won't have sex. Maybe, am I not attractive? Am I not good enough? Like, what? Do you like other people? Like, and so we teach all these things so unhealthily. So anyway, all to say, I have a fairly low sex drive. I'm not walking around going, oh God, I need to have sex constantly, which some people are, and that getting married for that reason is a really bad idea, you know, like seriously. I would advocate getting Tinder before I'd advocate getting married for the reason of I'm just horny all the time. And so, yeah, I just think we have a lot of really unhealthy practices that don't help people go through these processes of becoming a healthy person, because that's what's required to bring to a marriage, is a healthy person. Someone that's able to work on themselves, that values themselves, that sees themselves as an individual, autonomous, able to bring something healthy to the table. You know, it takes two people to become one. That kind of old adage. We look at it almost, and we're almost taught it, as that you should be like half a broken ass person, and if you find another half broken ass person, you'll become one. And what you actually become is a flipping nightmare. Right. You become one horrible person. Yeah, you become the marriage pastor's or whatever, the family pastor's worst nightmare. Absolutely. Sorry, I derailed in about 12.
No, I loved it. I mean, you know, that's the way we're going, is basically rabbit trail in this thing. But you know, for basically you did get married. I mean, you know, what was it like, and what was it different? You know, did you implement different things? I mean, how were the conversations? You know,
I think I would never recommend divorce. It sucks.
Right.
But actually, give it the right context, I would quickly recommend divorce. To be honest with you, you know, if someone's not compatible, if it's not working out, and I think you can love anyone, but I think there's scenarios in which you make it extraordinarily hard for yourself, and you're limiting yourself, and you're causing two people to be very miserable long term, and you're hurting kids and all sorts of things.
Well, that's an interesting thing. You know, just to bring that up. You know, my mom. She had a hard marriage, and she went to the pastor, and she said she went to the pastor and was fully prepared for him to say, stick it out, do your job, stay married. And she said she went, she told him about the marriage and everything, and he said, I don't see this as a union, as a marriage. Yep. And he basically said, you know, if you want to get a divorce, you can get a divorce.
Right.
Mind blown.
That's so refreshing to hear, because I don't hear that. I've talked to so many people that have basically their experience of marriage is that they are frequently abused or raped, and they've gone to a pastor, and the pastor has said, well, you're married to this person, they deserve your body, you're to give your body over to them, and it's just hugely unhealthy. So all I'd say, I wouldn't recommend divorce. Like it's not like something I'm saying, by the way, divorce is fun. It's pretty brutal and horrible, but for the right situations, I think it's important as well. But it did wonders for me. It caused me to really evaluate who I was, find my own identity. It gave me a lot more confidence. I learned a lot about women that I'd never learned in church, and I explored that, and I started to look into gender studies, sexuality studies, sexual studies. Like those are important areas that I think we need to educate people on. We talked about that in another podcast as well. But so I come into a relationship knowing much more about what I'm looking for in a marriage, how to operate in a marriage, what I can bring for a woman, how I can allow's the wrong word, because I mean, how arrogant is it that we allow women to be something, you know what I mean? But you know what I mean by that, of like, I'm not bringing a set of rules for a woman to obey onto the table. I'm coming to the table going, I am a really healthy person, and I'm looking for a really healthy person, and I want you to be a great person who has a great life, who is functional, who knows themselves, who enjoys their life, who brings a whole bunch to the table, and we can both bring something to the table and go, whoa, this is great. And we can enjoy sharing that with one another, but we can stop at certain points, and you go and do something on your own, and I'm going to do something on my own, and we're okay. We're not dysfunctional. We can spend a couple of weeks apart while I'm traveling through America doing podcasts with you, or, you know, doing different stuff, and that's okay. You know, or I can go out for a coffee and it's with a beautiful woman, and my wife's going, yeah, cool, great, no problem. Or my wife, you know, hangs out with some friends and they're good guy friends, and I'm like, yeah, that's okay. It's not an issue. We're healthy humans that aren't living wrapped in insecurity and all sorts of other stuff. Now, I'm not trying to big myself up and say I'm a really healthy person. I still have my own issues, and my wife will tell you I have plenty of issues I'm working on, loads and loads. And there's a whole bunch I'm not working on, right? She's got a list ready for me when I'm finished.
When you're done.
I'm joking. She's not like that at all. But, you know, there is that element of we're still growing, we're still developing. But I think that's a totally different dynamic coming into marriage this time. I'm coming in, I'm looking for a healthy person that knows how to enjoy themselves on their own, that isn't alive solely to be at the bequest of someone else. Like when I first started dating, I went online and started doing some online dating, looking for a partner and just exploring, because it wasn't, my community is quite close knit. It's in a suburb that, you know, you don't come across a big influx and turnover of new girls, and I'm straight, so that's what I'm looking for. So I was like, well, where do I find girls, right? And when I travel, it's a weird dynamic, because, you know, I'm usually like a speaker, or I'm in that sort of thing, and I don't like meeting people under that dynamic. It feels weird. I don't like it. So I was like, oh, I'll meet some people online. So, but you go scroll through some people's online profiles, especially if you go Christian dating, and oh my gosh, literally, some of the profiles are, hi, I'm a slave ready to find my boss, like master or something. That's really how it reads. It was like, I'm a faithful child of God, just waiting for my helpmeet to lead my household and tell me what to do. I'm very good at cooking. I'm very, whatever. I've never been in a relationship before, and they're just trying to present all these tropes, all the things that Christian guys want, quote unquote, which I don't know how many of them Christian guys really want. Right? I think for me, most of the guys I know, they want a healthy, strong woman that's smart, that's funny, that's bringing something to the table, that is an equal. And we complement one another. Me and Tilly aren't clones. Now, I'm not looking for a clone either, but I'm wanting someone I can have an intellectual conversation as an equal. So she's a philosophy degree, and I'm like, yes, hello, this is going to be great. Now, she likes talking about things a little bit less than me. I can talk forever. But I'm looking for these elements. I'm looking for someone that's got my same dark sense of humor. Because if you don't have my dark sense of humor, you're going to really have a bad time. And so we're looking for those things. What do you want? What are you interested in? Do you want to have kids? Do you not want to have kids? These are important things that you're bringing to the table that half the time people going into their first marriage aren't even asking. Especially with the gender gap in the church, which no one is talking about. No one is talking about the fact that if you look at single people in the church, there is 2 single women for every single male in the church globally. This is across the globe. In every country, this is roughly the statistic. 2 men for every 1 woman. Two women for every 1 man. And so we have a major problem here because we've kind of ignored this for a long time, but there's a lot more single women in the church than there are single men. And then we throw into that, on top of that, some different dynamics of, the man has to be a provider. So you gotta look for a guy that's wealthy. He's got a good job. He's got a house already, maybe, or that. So immediately we're like, maybe there's 10 guys and 20 women, but we just crossed off 7 guys in one go. Oh, he's got to be a spiritual leader. Well, that guy isn't that spiritual. Cross
equally
him off.
Yoked.
And so bit by bit, we've got one guy between 20 women at the end of it. Know, and then it's like, he's not that attractive. Oh, well, okay. Now we've got no guys and it's 20 women. But we're playing. So many of the things we bring to the table are so arbitrary, right? He's got to be taller. I'm like, really? You're going to die single because you want someone that's taller than you? Right? And so, and we do it as guys. But the interesting element is guys can be picky as hell because they've got 2-to-1 odds, right? So even if you're a bad catch, right, which many of us are, not so great looking, not so funny, not so smart, not so whatever, not so spiritual, not so mature, not a great leader, but guess what? There's still 5 girls left, And so you're still going, I'll pick the one I like the most, right? And so there is an element of this still at play. And yet we're teaching girls, you go into any youth group, not any, but 9 times out of 10, a youth group in America, a Christian youth group is going to say, God has the perfect husband for you. And if you just wait, He'll bring him along. You run after God and you'll find a man that's running the same pace alongside. You just look to your side and see him there. And the truth is, you run after God and you look either side, and the truth is, if for 50% of women, there's no men, and you're going to have to keep running after God till you die. Or you choose to marry someone that's not a Christian. Or you choose to be a lesbian. I don't know any other options.
Maybe that's why there are so many lesbians, because basically there's so many women out there without men.
Very possible. And this isn't the stats in the world. This is just in the church. The church attracts more females than males, whatever the reason is. So there's these dynamics. We're not talking about this. We're not helping people. But one of the things you can do is go, hey, your existence isn't to get married. Just saying that to a woman frees them up to go, yeah, you know what? I don't care. I want to go be a missionary for the rest of my life anyway. I don't care. Or whatever, whatever. I'm just saying, and I'd imagine the vast majority of them still want to get married, but at least that would free up some to go, oh, I don't have to live with that thing on my shoulders saying you got to be married. You're worthless if you're not married. You are literally worth less if you're not married. And that is what we think about people. We can say what we want, but the fact that we constantly ask younger people, so is there any guys, any girls, are you getting married? The fact that we constantly ask that, the fact we constantly ask, any kids soon? Are you trying for kids? That expressly states that the church thinks you are worth less if you're not married, and you're worth less if you don't have kids.
Well, I know even like some of the prerequisites to be an elder is you have to be married.
Absolutely.
To be a pastor, you have to be married, or to some churches, you can't be a pastor if you've been divorced. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's some weird stuff that we do. Yep. Actually, I don't know if you've known this or not, but the Catholic basically they didn't have, basically you had to be committed not to have sex and be married. They just changed it to they would take fathers who were married because they couldn't get enough of their churches filled with fathers. Wow. I just heard that in the last year that basically they changed it.
Is this in a specific region or something?
Probably in South America, stuff like that, in Brazil, some of those nations. And I think it's funny because basically man's drive to be married, and then the Catholic Church is like, no, you can't be married. Isn't that weird that we're like saying we don't want you to be married, we want you to be committed to God, and then for the people we're like, everybody be married. It's just kind of this back and forth.
Highlights this cultural thing again. It's all about culture. So even things like elders, you need to be a husband, right? Well, why? Well, again, because when you get married in that culture, you have now allegiances, you have ties, you have sway that so it's important that you're already married, that we already know that this person is allegiance is healthy, that it's within the church. You're not going to suddenly be married off to someone that is in some weird pagan cult, and now you're going to have some really bizarre influences from your powerful family on this side leading you differently, right? Because that's a real dynamic then. Probably less of a dynamic today.
But think about it. If they think that you should be married because the woman will balance you out, why do they not think we should have women elders?
Yeah. So that's a terrible argument, isn't it?
If a woman is strong enough to balance out a man, why not just let her be an elder?
Yeah. I think, again, we just look at culture, don't we? We look at culture and we go, oh, things are different then. So how does that apply to the text? Now that things are different culturally here, how would we potentially see that text now? Very few people do that work. They much rather go, we will take this and assume it's exactly the same. We'll assume that this culture is the culture they're talking about, which of course is ridiculous, right? Apostle Paul does not, in his letter to Timothy, imagine a world where cars and people fly through the air on steel tubes and are on the phone checking his theology. I mean, this is not what the Apostle Paul's imagining, right? He's writing to people that take horses and carriages and they go to their pagan church for an orgy, and this is the world he's in. And so he's writing, don't be unequally yoked, and that's a very different concept to someone that's in a world where if you marry a quote-unquote non-Christian, there's a good chance they go down to the pagan temple 3 times a week and they have an orgy, or they sleep with a temple prostitute. Can you imagine the strain that would put on your marriage? It's a bit different from marrying Clive, the accountant, who's a bit agnostic. He's not sure what he believes. Maybe he believes in God, maybe not. Not really sure. But outside of that, that's about it. That's a different relationship to the guy that goes and has an orgy 3 times a week, right? So unequally yoked can mean slightly different things in slightly different contexts and cultures.
Well, I was counseling with a woman who her husband never went to church. And, basically the church has demeaned men who don't go to church. They're, you need to tithe, you need to do this. Your husband, you're unequally yoked because your husband doesn't have the views of the church as being the most holy and right. So basically the church demonizes these men who stay home, and it might just be because maybe they don't view that we should have to tithe. Maybe they just view that the priest of the church is not the head of the household. I will go to say this: your husband, not that he should lord over you, words and thoughts are way more valuable than your pastor's. Your wife's words, thoughts, emotions are way more powerful, should be way more powerful to you than your pastor's. To me, don't be unequally yoked by accepting a pastor's word. I think that makes you unequally yoked. If you think your pastor's word is stronger than your husband's word, you're creating an unequally yoked for yourself, But anyways, and so I was talking to her and I says, spiritually speaking, she loved her husband. I mean, they loved each other, but there was always kind of that little rub, he doesn't go to church. Maybe now I've got to be the spiritual head of my family. Now I've got to do this. Now I've got to do. And so she basically puts on this whole garbage of pressure on herself. And I said, how do you know that your husband doesn't believe in God? I said, have you ever asked him? She said, well, no. I said, wow. You've been married for 15 years. You go to the church. You think the church, basically is the right place. The pastor's the right person. Your husband's stupid because he doesn't go to church. He doesn't know anything spiritually. And so I said, why don't you ask him 5 questions about God? You figure out the 5 questions that are important to you about God. And she made a list of 10. And she said every question he answered the same way she believes.
Wow.
15 years of being married, never had the conversation about what he believed in God. She just allowed the church to speak down about him. And my view's like, holy moly, why are we letting the church ruin our marriages?
Because what a rich conversation they could be having for 15 years, exploring spirituality together.
Yeah.
Right? It's brutal.
It really is. But, now basically she's left the church, and she says her husband is so connected with her and her kids now. And she sees where he was always kind of like, we look at spiritual person in the house as, did you make the family say prayer before you ate dinner?
Yep.
Well, that makes you the spiritual authority if you're doing that, as that gives you into heaven. Well, how many did you bless every meal before you ate it?
There was a meal that day on January the 18th that you didn't bless.
Right. You didn't pray with the kids. You didn't read the Bible. You didn't, say no to an R-rated movie. You didn't do any of these things. And so you're a wicked man. And I think that's kind of the reason that the churches do that. They demote the man so that the pastor can look more spiritual authority. Yep. I will pray with you on Sunday. I will read you the Bible. I will, do all these things. And basically what they're doing is trying to push the husbands out the door and make themselves presented more the manly figure in the relationship. And not saying for all parts, but if your husband doesn't go to church, go home and ask him the questions. Go home and make the commitment that you've made with him before on your relationship. Stop letting the church divide between the two of you. So in closing words, you're married?
I am married. I'm very happily married. So, yeah. So
through the whole marriage, deconstruction, remarriage, I
guess if I could give anyone one takeaway, it's be a healthy person. Your marriage is only as healthy as what you bring to it, and you cannot change the person you're married to. You can't. You have no say in it at all. And to the degree you think you have a say, you're probably only making it worse. You can only make yourself a healthy person. And so I think focusing on oneself to go, how do I become the most healthy, stable, loving, kind, grace-filled person that I can be? And am I giving my partner the freedom to do the same? Am I giving them the freedom to be their own person, to explore that, to enjoy that, to go and explore what their hobbies are, what their relationships can be, what they can do with their time, and how they might pursue their passions and their dreams? Let them do that, you do you, and actually bring that together in a healthy way. And marriage is a totally different dynamic when that's coming to play, rather than, well, you got to get married, you got to find one that will accept you, or you can talk them into marriage, and then you've got this weird power dynamic and
humble and submit,
absolutely,
and,
all these different words that we twist,
and that's one thing is like, I don't feel like I love the thing where you're basically saying know who you are in God, because if you know those things, you'll be less likely to be humble and submit. Not that humble and submit is bad, but for me, if you've got to humble and submit and lose your identity, then yes, it's bad. I love how you come in and say, me and my wife, we complement each other, we help each other. And that's one, like for all of the verses in the Bible, the one that is the best for my marriage is to become one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't care about anything else, to become one.
Yeah, and it's those kind of concepts, submit and humble, have been twisted. So humility, my gosh, of course we want to be humble, but that doesn't mean we get walked all over. That's not what humility is. Humility is knowing who you are and choosing to posture yourself low, choosing to put the other person and go, I'm gonna serve you, I'm gonna honor you, I'm gonna respect you. It doesn't mean that when they're an idiot, you go, well, no, I'm being humble. No, you go, dude, you're being an idiot, right? But it does mean that we both want to do something, and you go, you know what? I can take the lesser path. I can serve you. I can be less selfish and allow you selflessly to do something that I'm not as excited about doing. Or humility goes, I don't know everything. I really don't. you know? So I'm not assuming that everything I know is wrong, but I'm assuming that even though I'm a healthy human being, you are too. So I'm going to assume that you also have things to say. I'm going to assume that you also bring something to the table, and it's just as valid as me. The woman brings everything she brings is just as valid as whatever the man brings, and then together you explore, you look at those things, you make decisions together, and it's not that the guy has a vote worth 1.1, you know, or whatever, you know. It's you have a vote 1 versus 1, you know. That is how it works, and if you disagree, you're gonna have to figure that out. You're gonna have to talk it through, but you don't go, well, that's it, I'm the head, you know. You don't pull rank, or you know, all these things.
I've done it. I'm embarrassed.
Absolutely, so many of us have grown in, and it's what we talked about again with the implicit and explicit racism, sexism, things that I mentioned in a prior podcast. I can't remember which. It's that there's things that we explicitly know are wrong. You know, so you can be an explicit racist and you can say certain words, and that, you know, it's wrong, and that makes you a racist. It does. You are a racist if you do something you know is racist. But there's implicit things that are racist, and there's implicit things that are sexist. There's implicit things that are wrong, and it's just systematic things that I'm a part of, but I don't know. And so I might be a part of a system in the church that says I'm better than my wife, or I'm above my wife, or I have more points to throw in the vote system, whatever that is. You're not. It's not something you need to be condemned of, and you shouldn't feel shameful of that. Like when you find out, man, that's maybe not right. I don't know if I feel that's wrong. I want to change. The fact that you recognize it's wrong means that you draw the line in the sand and you go, oh gosh, that's really bad, but I didn't know. Now, if you keep doing something wrong, there's something wrong. You are explicitly being sexist, or, you know, misogynistic, or whatever. That's where it's a problem. Yes, you really should, you know, evaluate hard and look in the mirror and go, man, I'm being a real ass if I'm not like changing here. But generally speaking, when we realize what we're doing wrong, we at least start to move the needle. We start to try and turn the ship, and it might take us a while, and we might make some errors along the way, but on the whole, we're changing. And I think it's really important that when we listen to podcasts like this and we're exposed to lots of new ideas, and maybe some of them we go, oh yeah, I like that idea and I need to change. We don't beat ourselves up for the past. We didn't know. You can't beat yourself up for ignorance. But now you know. You might have to beat yourself up a little bit every now and again, because you go, oh, dang it, that's not okay. I've fallen back into that habit. And so I think it's okay in the past that you were like, I'm pulling rank, I'm the head of the house, because that's what you were taught. That's the whole system that you were in. And your wife probably was like, yeah, that's the way it works, you know. Right. But now you know differently. You probably do that a lot less, if at all. But if you did do it, you would probably 10 minutes later go, oh, dang, that's
we recognize
okay.
it quicker.
And you quickly go, hey, hun, I'm really sorry. Old me jumping in here. And that's good as well. That's healthy and reasonable, isn't it?
So in closing, the best statement of the day is don't be an ass, change.
There you go. That's it.
Thank you so much for coming in today. Go ahead and give out your connections.
Yeah, so please connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook, it's Phil Drysdale Ministries. Instagram, it's Phil Drysdale. So it's PhilDrysdale. I love to chat, explore things with people, help people process, so please send me messages and I'm happy to chat with you if you have questions, especially if you don't have a safe place to have those kind of conversations. And you can find me on thegracecourse.com. Lots and lots of videos on lots of different topics, and it's all free, so dive in there and enjoy that as well.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.